Today we'll discuss about signs of meningeal irritation. I'm not in a position to demonstrate the clinical signs. The commonest one is the neck stiffness, then the Kernig signs, Brudsensi signs, and different other signs are there with different names. So practically these two tests are enough. So our purpose is to know about the usefulness and the limitation of the sign. Different clinical situations, you may consider this sign representing the signs of meningeal irritation, and you may wrongly interpret this as a meningitis, viral bacteria, whatever. And there are situations where true infections are missed because you are not having the clinical sign. So, the limitation of the different clinical signs, false positivity and false negativity. So, the basis of this diagnostic sign, when there is inflammation of the meninges, that will lead to irritation of the nerve roots and extensor muscle spasm. That is the basis of this thing. And there is an extensor muscle spasm, all the flexion movements of the spine will be limited. That's what you are testing. But there are a lot of situations where this can occur without your true state of meningeal inflammation. A lot of other painful situations. You might have heard about the opisthotonus happening in the case of spastic quadriplegia, bilateral pyramidal damage due to post-meningitic sequelae. All those situations where the pyramidal tract bilaterally damaged or extrapyramidal, all can lead to the extensor spasm of very long duration. So, that extensor spasm doesn't mean it is due to meningeal inflammation or irritation. So, you should be able to differentiate the true value of this sign which represents the inflammation of the meninges. So, what are the basics of this thing? So, this is the most relaxed position. You can imagine the vertebra is like C. Number 1, number 2, all these 33 vertebra is like C, where the uppermost part is a little extended and you get the curvature here, lumbar a little lordosis, it's like that. It's not that C, overall it is a C. So wherever you lead to a bending forward, lead to the spinal cord is just like a string stretched over. This is the C and the spinal cord is stretched over the back, followed by nerve roots coming in the lower limb. When you bend the spine, automatically there will be a stretching of this thing. When you bend it, so this string is stretched. When you bend here, the string is stretched here. When you bend again, bend at the hip, the string is more stretched. Extend it further, it is again stretched. You extend the foot. So this is a situation where the lower part is stretched at the maximum. The flexing at the hip, extension of the knee and extension of the foot is the situation where the string behind is stretched the maximum. You are bending the neck. So which is the situation where maximum stretch is the bending the neck, flexing the hip, extend the knee and dorsiflexing this thing. So the outside thread is that much stretched. So when you are testing the neck stiffness only, you are applying a stretching force upper part only. When you are doing Kernig sign, you are trying to stretch the lower part only. So there can be a little higher level this thing method where you are flexing the neck with a extension. So you are combining the Kernig's plus the the neck flexion. So that is Dr. Johnny Vincent's sign. He tried to elicit the neck stiffness in the sitting position instead of the lying position. So sitting automatically make your lower part stretched, the hip flexion and the knee extension, and over this thing when you are bending, you are more likely to elicit the next sign, meningeal sign. So that is Johnny Vincent's sign. So basics is only this one. So what about the interpretation? So when you consider other DDs, basically it is an extensor muscle spasm only. That is 7 point. So when you are considering the neck stiffness, you always do the lower part also, because for the differentiation of other conditions you need that. I'll come to the interpretation part. So what all situations you may get a false with a neck stiffness other than the true meningeal inflammation? Where all you can get a false negativity? All of us know you may miss a true inflammation where none of the signs of meningeal irritation is possible. Examples at extremes of age. In a newborn, very young child, in an extremely old age, the sick person, you may get meningitis where the neck stiffness signs of meningeal irritation are absent. And where other coexisting problems of sick situations, peripheral weakness and all, this may be absent. Then another difficult situation where you are likely to miss is in a crying child. You may miss it, and there is a different method to elicit by bringing it to the end of the table to avoid the voluntary holding back. So when you are bringing to the edge of the table, child won't be extending further. So that part can be avoided, whatever the flexion limitation is through extensor spasm. So you now come to the neck stiffness. What are the situations where you may get a difficulty, neck stiffness positive? Of course, your meningeal inflammation, meningitis. Encephalitis is one situation where there need not be meningeal inflammation because meninges are spared in a pure encephalitis. The next thing is you can get a signs of meningeal irritation not due to an infection, but there is irritation, subarachnoid bleed. The other situations are all conditions which mislead you because of the pain. All pathologies of the spine, like tuberculous spine. In an older person, degenerative changes in the spine, malignancies, secondary deposits. In a child with Hanschula, this one, Langerhans cell disorders involving the bone. And there can be other situations outside this thing, where the child keeps the neck extended, retropharyngeal abscess is one. So you may mistake this extensor position for especially high grade fever, toxic, always crying child, keeping the neck always back. So you may miss a retropharyngeal abscess. So a painful condition anywhere in the neck can lead to a false, misleading thing. And two more other important situations you need to consider, which is not that common now, one is tetanus. Occasionally, hydrophobia and strychnine poisoning. All these entities are rare now. I won't be discussing at all about the long duration extensor spasm in case of cerebral palsy like situation or a sequelae of bilateral UN signs. discussing only short duration problems where you are considering this acute problems and meningitis. So how will you differentiate one from the other? That's what you are discussing. Most important thing is neck stiffness. There's a difficulty in flexing the neck only. It won't affect the sideways bending. Spade. It won't affect the rotation. There won't be any tenderness. There won't be any swellings. So, very important. Neck stiffness, representing true meningeal irritation. All the other movements are spared except the forward flexion. That's not the case in any of the organic problems producing pain. Think about this caries spine, think about the disc prolapse, think about the other involvement of the vertebra. All the other entities, you will get the limitation of all the other movements equally. It's not the flexion only. Now, I didn't include one of the entities so close to the meningitis, that is meningism, where this entity is not due to the inflammation. You may come across a situation in a case of upper lobe pneumonia, rarely Hendrich fever, malaria and all. You may get some spasm of the thing. So, in a case with high grade fever, in all the situations, you are very likely to consider this possibility. But better to do an LP and rule out meningitis, because almost all these situations which I mentioned, upper lobe pneumonia due to pneumococci, malaria, Hendrich, all are very well known to produce a meningeal or a brain involvement. So, rather than considering meningism, better to do an LP and rule out the real involvement, actual involvement of the CNS. About the other entities, when you get this thing, always make the patient open the mouth, because there is some closely important thing, tetanus. So when you get a signs of meningeal irritation, something which precedes this thing is the trismus. Trismus is a very useful sign, because this helps to differentiate from 2-3 entities. One is hydrophobia. Hydrophobia, you will get the difficulty in swallowing and all aerophobia, hydrophobia part, but the trismus will not be there. The meningeal signs or something which is a late thing. So first thing which occur in a hydrophobia is this thing, difficulty in swallowing water. Pharyngeal muscle spasm is the main thing. Tetanus, it's not a pharyngeal muscle spasm, it's the trismus part. Then of course pharyngeal muscle spasm occurs in tetanus later, and all the other spasms occurs. It's in sequence. By the time you get the next stiffness, trismus is a MERS, and you can do the tongue depressor sign. Tongue depressor you try and it will bite. You cannot open the spatula sign is what is it called. So that is one very useful test. Tetanus and strychnine poisoning also, this is a little unusual. Nowadays we rarely see the strychnine poison. So after this thing, you apply the general examination and the other points. The two very important general examination findings are, what is the sensorium? Is he having fever? A situation where you are getting altered sensorium indicates most likely it is a meningitis itself. A situation where the sensorium is maintained, it may be something else. It may be tetanus, it may be a hydrophobia situation, it may be strychnine poisoning, or it may be some of the painful conditions. So altered sensorium is so important. Then fever, presence of fever and absence of fever. One entity where altered sensorium is there and neck stiffness is there is subarachnoid bleed. The differentiating between these two is absence of fever. The fever is invariably there in a case where there is neck stiffness and altered sensorium. But neck stiffness and altered sensorium, fever absent in a case of subarachnoid bleed. So that's how you differentiate different entities among these. Now comes here, you are utilizing the signs of us, the stretching signs in the lower part, bend irritation, Kernig sign. So what is the use of that? You consider a lot of differential diagnosis of this one. All the entities where pain is responsible for the limitation of flexion, Kernig signs will be absent. So when there is a Kernig sign positivity, so it rules out all your painful situations misleading. So it's a true sign of mental irritation. So that is the usefulness of eliciting multiple signs. Otherwise, you need to only this one. Why should you go for the Kernig sign? So if the neck stiffness is the Kernig signs are the number of entities comes down. It is in an acute situation, one of these situations of meningeal irritation, either infections of the meninges or a subarachnoid bleed or tetanus or strychnine poisoning. Simple. So in that situation, points for trismus, immunization status, consumption of the poisons, or maybe the dog bite, everything should be, you go back to the history thing. And one very important point is to palpate the abdomen in between. Just touch the abdomen. The board-like guarding rigidity and persistent hypertonia situation argues more for tetanus. Strychnine poisoning in between, the flaccidity prevails. So, what did we discuss? I didn't tell you how to elicit the different clinical signs which you need to watch from the other YouTube. How to interpret, how to make use of different clinical signs to pinpoint different entities. That's what we discussed. Thank you.